Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Now, I have to be very honest with you. This is huge. I couldn't resist. Taking off the... Okay, let's see if this one works. All right, we'll do our best.
I turned it off.
Great, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I walked in and everybody asked questions. So what I'd like to do is just give you a very brief, concise view of where we are, and then we're going to pretend we're on the radio, and I'm just going to take your questions, okay? So I think that works. Believe it or not, there's a lot going on in the world. Quickly, let me try to put in perspective the death of Antonin Scalia. His death, as all of you understand, leaves a huge void. It is now a 4-4 breakdown on the court. The question of whether the president will be able to get a nominee through seems very clear to me. He won't. We will probably have a vacancy on the court for at least a year and a half. Everybody needs to understand that that does not cripple the Supreme Court, because as long as there are 5 justices who agree on a particular matter, there will be a judgment. The Republicans are digging in. They're digging in hard. The reason is that they understand the balance of the court, what the court will decide in the future, hinges on who's on the Supreme Court. Everybody here understands that the critical cases, whether it's Obamacare, abortion, whether it has to do, well, you name the issue, gay marriage, doesn't matter. All these cases ultimately come to the court, and the court is decisive. Right now, on that court, there are critical decisions, including decisions that affect California directly. And we're just going to have to wait, what it boils down to. What it does do is put the Supreme Court front and center in the campaign. The Democrats are going to make the claim that if you want to preserve what we have, you better put us in. And the Republicans are going to say you want to turn it away, you want to go back to traditional values, we have to win the election. There is no question. This I want to be crystal clear on, who is president matters. It's not Tweedledum and Tweedledee. It never is. Whoever is president of the United States, whether it's a Supreme Court nominee, or foreign policy, or domestic policy, has a decisive impact. So everybody voting is critical. Let's turn to the presidential campaign quickly. And I know there'll be a lot of questions about it, and that's why I'm moving as fast as I am. Hillary and Bernie are locked in a battle. Let me explain quickly that the odds are in Hillary's favor. Part of that reason is because of the superdelegates. There are over 700 superdelegates that are elected public officials, Democratic Party officials. They're lining up overwhelmingly for Hillary. She already has over 370 of those delegates. For Bernie Sanders to win the nomination, he would have to really, really come on strong. I have to tell you, I don't see a path for the nomination for him. And the reason is because he's running into Super Tuesday. The voters there tend to be slightly more conservative. They are going to go with Hillary over Sanders. But I got to tell you never know what's going to happen in politics. All I can tell you is they said, I worked in the '68 campaign. You'll remember Gene McCarthy did remarkably well in a number of key states, and yet Hubert Humphrey still emerged as the nominee. Let me also say a quick word about Hillary. Could she be indicted? Possible. We'll have to see how that plays out. The bigger scandal, if there is one, is the Clinton Foundation, with all the money that has come in from foreign powers. Question is, what happens if Hillary stumbles? So I want to give you a rule that most people are not aware of. In 1968, Robert Kennedy had accumulated delegates to the Democratic Convention, assassinated here in California, and the question was, what would happen to his delegates? If you are an elected delegate, you remain an elected delegate. You're a delegate. The Kennedy delegates got together, they caucused in Chicago, and they decided to vote for George McGovern on the first ballot. You'll all remember Eddie Ribicoff's speech nominating McGovern, where he shook his fist at Dick Daley and talked about Gestapo tactics in the streets of Chicago. I say this because Joe Biden is waiting in the wings. If Hillary stumbles, the Democratic establishment will roll out Joe Biden. The superdelegates will be right there for him, and in addition to that, I would suggest to you, most of the Hillary delegates will be there too. So it's a fluid situation. The odds still remain with Hillary, but you never know in love, war, or politics. Now let's go to the Republicans. The polls this morning and I started this morning at 4 a.m. Doing a commentary and a blog. The odds are on Donald Trump. It appears that he's over 30 points ahead in South Carolina. If he wins in South Carolina, the momentum that he has coming into Nevada and the caucuses next week, and then into Super Tuesday, which is Monday, March 1st, make his nomination almost inevitable. Now I say that, and I'm not here to be partisan, but I have to tell you, it scares the hell out of me that Donald Trump could be president of the United States.
Amen, brother.
Now let me indicate to you two groups that are particularly concerned. They are the Republican establishment, who frankly have demonstrated great weakness in this campaign because there is no more Republican establishment. It's what it boils down to. But they are very concerned about the future of the party. Second group, National Review. Many of you remember William F. Buckley, the editor of National Review, and what a stellar conservative publication that was. The leading light of the conservative movement. In their last issue, 22 leading conservative thinkers in the United States explained why they could not vote for Donald Trump. So you have two major constituencies of the Republican Party that really are worried about him. But let me say in turn, they no longer have an impact. They really don't. National Review is passé, and as for the Republican establishment, they don't really exist. What you have, very simply, are two constituencies in the Republican Party that seem to be the dominant forces, the Tea Party movement and the evangelicals. Now, many of you will recall when last I spoke here, I coined a campaign slogan for Ted Cruz. I'm sure you all remember, right? Let's put the country on cruise control. I spoke this morning with friends in South Carolina who are relatively reliable. They tell me Trump should win, but the caveat is that the best organized ground campaign is Ted Cruz. He really is a genius at organization. He and his wife are a remarkable team. That's how they won in Iowa. And they hope to be able to pull the same thing right in Saturday's South Carolina primary. What does it mean overall? When you get into Super Tuesday, you get into a suite of primaries, which are primarily conservative Republicans. The Republicans have a choice. If they nominate Ted Cruz, the Republican establishment will be furious because Ted Cruz criticized Mitch McConnell, ripped him up and down. Ted Cruz is not popular with his own colleagues in the United States Senate. He went after Speaker Boehner mercilessly, and now he's going after the new Speaker of the House, who is, frankly, Mitt Romney's former running mate and a guy who should be popular in the Republican Party, Paul Ryan. So the establishment views him very negatively, and he's one tough cookie. By the way, one of the smartest men you'll ever run into in politics. Alan Dershowitz, a liberal Democrat, 50 years on the faculty at Harvard Law School, said the smartest student he had in 50 years at Harvard, the smartest student in 50 years was Ted Cruz. So no one should underestimate the fact that he's very smart, very ideologically committed, really quite something. Cruz is the target now. Why did Donald Trump hold a press conference the other day, ripping him up and down? Because he sees Cruz as his major competition. He's right. Cruz is going to be strong going into Super Tuesday. But the question becomes this: is Trump stoppable? If he wins in South Carolina by better than 30 points, it's going to be very hard for the Republicans to come up with an alternative. Now let me say a quick word about Marco Rubio. They say Marco Rubio is everyone's second choice. But let me explain very simply that Marco Rubio is as conservative fundamentally as Ted Cruz. Why is there hesitation about Marco Rubio? He joined the Gang of Eight. He was willing to compromise on the question of immigration, and that, frankly, disturbed the Tea Party people profoundly. But understand that if I were king of the Republican Party, and I could name a winning ticket, this would be the ticket. John Kasich of Ohio for president, and Marco Rubio for vice president. Let me explain that it is because of the importance of the Electoral College. No Republican has been elected president of the United States without carrying the state of Ohio. You got to carry Ohio. You put Kasich on the ticket, you got a shot. And Florida is another swing state. So if you go to Florida, you put Rubio on, you really got a shot. Is the Republican Party smart enough to do that? I have no idea. I don't think so. But Trump is virtually a class of himself. Somebody asked me, who would Trump take for vice president? If he could take anybody, he'd take himself. Now, let's shift for a moment. I walked in, somebody asked me about Michael Bloomberg. Michael Bloomberg has already announced that if Hillary Clinton is the nominee, he will not run as a third-party candidate. But I do want you to understand his logic. Bloomberg's logic is that if Sanders is please notice I'm using my left hand. If Sanders is the Democratic nominee and Trump the Republican nominee, that he will be able to run right up the Senate. But here's the kicker. The last third-party candidate, the elected president of the United States, was Abraham Lincoln in 1860. And you can name the third-party candidates who have really had an impact. Theodore Roosevelt in 1912, Bob La Follette in 1924, Henry A. Wallace and Strom Thurmond in 1948, George Wallace in 1968, and you know the others, Ross Perot, John Anderson, etc. Here's the kick, though. You got to qualify for the ballot. And to get on the ballot in all 50 states is not the easiest thing because each state has its own rules. So if Bloomberg is going to run, he's got to do it fast, and he's got to do it hard, and he can't hold back. And he's really got to run an all-out campaign. If Bloomberg runs, who does he hurt? And that's a very good question. I think he hurts the Democrats more than he hurts the Republicans. Remember, he was a Democrat for many years and became a Republican, but his stand on gun control is particularly significant, and that would hurt Hillary or Bernie Sanders in a race. Let me also discuss another factor for you, because we live in California. It's a bit of a bubble. In order to be elected president, it's a state-by-state race, as we learned in 2000. It's not the national popular vote that matters. But please be aware that the Democrats have a huge advantage. The Democratic advantage is that 90 to 95% of African Americans are going to vote for the Democrats. 75% of Jews are going to vote for the Democrats. I believe 70% of women will vote for the Democrats just on the abortion issue alone, because that is going to be an issue over the Supreme Court. And of course, Hispanics, who are now critical. People don't understand this tremendous demographic shift. 70% of Hispanics are going to vote for the Democrats, and every time Donald Trump talks about building a wall, there are more Hispanics inclined to vote for the Democrats. In order to be elected president, you can't just run on a narrow base that the Republican Party has. You have to be able to reach out. The biggest problem the Republican Party has is putting together those coalitions. So what are the clear indicators? There are two things you want to watch for. One, economic dislocation. If there is an economic crash, like there was in 2008 in September, it throws everything off kilter. And the party in power, meaning the Democrats, are the ones who take the hit, not the Republicans. So that's one big thing. So all of you in real estate out there, keep the market going at least till next January if you're a Democrat. And the second key thing would be a major terrorist action, a war, terrorist activity. I want you to know that is very likely, and it will have a huge impact, because again, the attack will be on the incumbents, the Democrats, for not being tough enough on terror. These are the two variables which mean that you really can't make a prediction about winners or losers. By rights, the Democrats should win based on issues and demographics, but those are the two variables. Let me just indicate one other thing, and then we'll go to questions. Barack Obama did something yesterday that was quite remarkable. He blasted Donald Trump. Now, I worked for Richard Nixon, and I'm going to tell you what made Dick Nixon a viable candidate in 1968. Days before the 1966 midterm election, Lyndon Johnson blasted Dick Nixon as a chronic campaigner. It put Nixon front and center. Nixon then delivered the national Republican address on television to tell people to vote Republican, and indeed, the Republicans gained 47 seats in the House of Representatives. It was viewed as a vindication of Nixon, who had been a loser, now being a winner. And the key here was what Lyndon Johnson did. Johnson really helped Nixon. I believe President Obama did the same thing yesterday for Donald Trump. By blasting Donald Trump, by making him the center only days before the South Carolina primary, I think it means that a lot of Republicans who really hate, and I use the word advisedly, hate Barack Obama, that they are going to go to the polls and they're going to vote for Trump to say, up yours, Mr. President. And this is something that we have to understand. For every action, we know there's a reaction. And that is particularly true in a volatile election year. Well, I know there was one other question somebody had, and that was who would Hillary take as a vice presidential running mate? I'm going to stick my head way out and tell you, whoever the Democrats nominate, the person I think will be the Democratic nominee for vice president is Julio Castro, the former mayor of San Antonio. He's 42 years old, he's very articulate, gave the best speech at the Democratic convention, absolutely stellar guy. His brother is also in Congress, his twin brother. Great guy, but I'm telling you, Castro is being groomed. He went to Iowa, he campaigned side by side with Hillary, had a huge impact because he's a charismatic figure. Now let me just point something out to you. You put Castro on that ticket. Normally, vice presidential running mates don't make a difference. But you all remember one time when the vice presidential running mate made a difference. And that was Lyndon Baines Johnson running with John F. Kennedy in 1960. Joe Kennedy said to John Kennedy, you take Lyndon and you win the election because you'll carry Texas. Without him, you lose. And Joe Kennedy was right. What makes this so interesting is the Republicans can't win without carrying Texas. You put Castro on the ticket, given the changing demographics in Texas, and you got a clear shot at the possibility of the Democrats carrying Texas. And that would be fatal for the Republicans. So that is another fact. You know what it's like? This whole thing is like a giant chess game. And you've got to really think 2 or 3 steps ahead. You've got to think about what you're doing and how you're doing it. Matter of fact, you might even subscribe to a conspiracy theory. I'm not talking about Judge Scalia's death. But maybe, I won't take questions on that. But maybe, just maybe, President Obama named Trump the way he did in order to help Trump win the nomination. Because I'm going to tell you one thing, Nancy Pelosi would love to be Speaker again. And she believes, and many of the Democrats believe, that if Trump leads the ticket, it'll lead the Republicans to defeat on a congressional level. So who knows? All these little factors. Okay, I'm stopping. Can I do that? Okay, I took 12 minutes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Now, let's throw it open. We got 20 minutes. Public. Yes.
Is there another mic? Here's the mic. Where is the mic?
Oh, here's the mic. Yes.
So I thought that the Tea Party and the evangelicals were, at least in numbers, minority in the Republican Party. But how do they have so much control or hold so much sway over that?
Okay, the question is Tea Party and evangelicals. They don't have.
I've got to get here. Okay. The Tea Party, they don't have the power. Okay. Let me explain. These people are not running for president of the United States. They are running for the Republican nomination for president of the United States. So what you need to win the nomination, you need votes. Dick Nixon once said to me, for the Republicans to win the nomination, you got to run to the right in the primaries. For the Democrats, you got to run to the left. And then who gets to the center first takes the nomination. What is happening now is the Republican Party is counting on the people who turn out to vote in primaries and caucuses. So what the candidates for the Republican nomination are doing are spotting those candidates, spotting those issues, and that's how they're going to win. That's exactly what Trump is doing, what Cruz is doing, what Rubio is doing, what Casey did almost successfully in New Hampshire. So that's the answer. Their power rests on winning the nomination. That's it. Rich?
Could you talk a little bit about Iran, the going forward from the agreements we made there and the sailors that were captured?
The question is about Iran. Nobody trusts the Iranians. Nobody. And there's a serious question. We essentially returned to them what amounts to $150 billion. And they're pumping that money in all the places we wouldn't want it to go. Today, Iran fundamentally, along with Islamic State forces, control Iraq. It is equally important to understand that Syria is a state that no longer exists. The world has raised $10 billion for relief aid, and it's not going to make a bit of difference because there's no way to get the aid in. The Middle East is a mess. And by the way, very interesting that Donald Trump blasted George Bush, saying that America was not safe during the Bush presidency. And the Middle East is a mess because of George W. Bush. The Bush family has now trotted everyone out in South Carolina. This is Jeb's last stand. And interestingly enough, the arguments being used by Donald Trump dealing with the Middle East are the same arguments you can read at moveon.org. It's the same argument. But I will tell you honestly that the Middle East is a mess, that there is nothing we can really do to control it. The question of monitoring the Iranian nuclear program, I think, leaves much to be desired, and this is just the beginning of a real crisis, which is going to continue into the next administration. One other quick point, Bernie and Hillary, whatever you think of Hillary Clinton, she has a depth of foreign policy experience. Whether you agree with everything she's done, whatever it means, she knows what she's doing. The problem with Bernie Sanders, who has captured the popular imagination on social issues, is he has virtually no depth in foreign policy, and he demonstrates that every time he talks. So it's a real question. But the American people are not focused on foreign policy. Dick Nixon once said to me, 70% of an American president's time is spent on foreign policy. And trust me, that's why your question is so important, Rich. The Middle East is going to be a central focus. One other quick point, that has to do with immigration, because it's such an issue in this campaign. When spring comes, there will be 2 to 3 million immigrants from the Middle East heading toward Europe. And the Europeans are completely unprepared for what's going to happen. Angela Merkel, who opened Germany, is now facing the consequences. If Merkel were to run for re-election as chancellor today, she would lose. And it's true, there is a huge cultural gap. The threat of terror is so great. And you heard the director of the CIA on 60 Minutes, Sunday night, very unusual, say clearly that we're in line for a major attack. Let me tell you, you heard this morning on the question of Apple and whether or not they are going to get into this phone and figure out everything. We are going to be caught in this country on the horns of a great dilemma. National security versus personal privacy. And I will tell you bluntly and honestly that if there is an attack, the American people will opt for national security. If you can't walk out your door with a modicum of security, all the rest means nothing. And that will play, I think, big in this campaign, and you can just imagine Donald Trump as the Republican candidate for president talking about it. Next question, yes, sir.
John, welcome back to the Breakfast Club. I enjoy the way you simulate these discussions, but I'm about a chapter into a book called Tenured Radicals. I don't know if you have read the book or not. It looks like to me the theme of the book is that way back in the 60s, we had, of course, radical uprising against the war and so on and so forth. But those folks are now ensconced in the private higher institution of higher education, and it has affected a lot of different things in American society at a lot of different levels. And one thing that I noticed during this campaign is that interviews on the campuses, almost 100% with the students, reveal that they're for Bernie Sanders, and these are kids in their 20s. And I said to myself, wow, what's going on here? I mean, his policies are so far out from the mainstream. Is there a correlation? Is this a theme of the book correct? Is there a correlation?
Okay, the question is, the radicals of the 60s are now ensconced on college campuses.
Yeah.
Well, let me be very clear with you. I don't agree with the thesis of the book. I have read it.
Okay.
It is something promulgated, I must tell you, very often on right-wing radio. that the radicals of the 60s are now controlling the minds of our kids. I have a kid who just graduated from UC Davis. I spent a lot of time on campus. There are also conservatives who are on campuses. Why are kids attracted to Bernie Sanders? I don't know, I think Bernie Sanders has a certain appeal. Hillary Clinton's very worn, very tired. The Republicans have no particular advantage there. And Bernie Sanders says outrageous things. May I tell you who the other popular person is? Donald Trump. You'd be amazed at how much support Donald Trump has on college campuses. And the reason is because when you're 20-something, when you hear somebody say something that's really outrageous, it makes a difference. But I speak before a lot of groups, and I speak before a lot of students. They're very thoughtful, and they're very worried. Students are worried about the economy. Many of them are burdened with student debt, these student loans. Do you know that we have $2 trillion in student debt hanging out there? And there are people, I took my son had his birthday a few years ago, and we were up in Davis, and I made a reservation at a very fancy restaurant. It would have cost me quite a bit of money, almost as much money as the dues for the Golden Gate, the breakfast place. but the kids said, no, we don't want to go there. We want to go to In-N-Out Burger. And it saved me a fortune. But I learned sitting around that table.
Talked about it the other night. I read the book Bankruptcy 1995 years ago. Scared me. Didn't happen. But now we're at $19 trillion, and it's serious. I read the book The Real Crash. I mean, it seems like we're headed for a financial cliff, and the Democrats are driving.
The Democrats aren't, okay, the question of the financial cliff, and are we about to go over it? It's not driven by Democrats or Republicans. It's driven by both, and by the demands of the American people. We do not want our social services cut. Now, it's interesting. I listened to Donald Trump yesterday say something I happen to agree with. Very unusual. There are people who have been pushing something called a penny tax. That on every dollar you spend, you take 1 penny to try to reduce the national debt. It makes great sense. Because when the interest on the debt gets to where it is now, we're in deep trouble. And everybody here needs to understand that we fought the war in Iraq and Afghanistan off the books. That's why we have the debt we have. If we are hit with another attack, we will have to fight it off the books again. And I want everyone to be clear, my position is if you're going to go to war, you got to be able to pay for it, and that means an additional tax. Because otherwise what we're doing to our children, our grandchildren, and not only that, to ourselves because of the economy is critical. But that's not something candidates for president like to talk about. They don't like to talk about it because it's not a solvable problem. It's easier to talk about parent school, or same-sex marriage, or abortion. Issues where you can take a stand, but, well, they're easy issues. But when you talk about tackling the major problems this country faces, and by the way, including in foreign policy, Islamic State now controls more territory than you can imagine. Their financial infrastructure is phenomenal. We face a real crisis, yes. Yeah.
Defer to the President.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'll take it.
The thought on my mind is, as an older person, remembering the evil empire that we fought for so many years and the reemergence of Russia as an opponent. I feel like we are beginning to do what we did during the Cold War and fighting surrogate wars between the two of us.
Okay, the question is about surrogate wars with Russia. Look, when East Germany rose up against the Soviet Union in 1953, when Hungary rose up in 56, when Czechoslovakia rose up in 68, we couldn't go to war because we're facing a nuclear power. What was the first thing Putin said when he went into Crimea? He said, remember, we have nuclear weapons. And the Europeans are scared to death because they know if there's a war, it'll be a war fought on the European continent. And so one of the things we have in dealing with Vladimir Putin is the problem that Russia may not be an economic superpower, but it is a nuclear power, and the Russians have national interests. They want their perimeter protected. The last thing they want is what the Republicans are talking about, which is American defensive systems on their border. So it's a very serious problem, and there's no real way to handle it in terms of a war. It has to be done by negotiation. Yes.
I find Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan's reaction to the Syrian issue and closing the border to make a lot of sense from the Turkish perspective. And I also find his comments interesting when he blames NATO. Look, you can't stop Putin from doing this bombing, and that's what's bringing the people here. So is NATO reaching the point of being irrelevant? And is the whole, in fact, European Union absorbing the drain, or what's going on?
Okay, the question is about NATO. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was created by Harry Truman. Dwight Eisenhower was the first commander of NATO. It is our arm in Europe. We can't let NATO falter. If we do, we're up the creek without a paddle. By the way, the Europeans understand that. Even the French, who pulled out of NATO in the 1960s, understand its vital importance. But there are limits to what we can do. When you talk about the immigration problem, the Europeans are being flooded, and there are cultural differences. You know about the sexual assaults that have impacted, particularly in Germany. You know the Eastern Europeans don't want the new immigrants coming in. That the British are very nervous about what's happening. I don't have an answer, because the world is so troubled, and there are no clear solutions. When Donald Trump says he's going to build a wall, may I be blunt, I have never known a wall you couldn't crawl over, crawl under, or go around. You can build all the walls you want, but that's not going to protect us. And by the way, if I hear the Republicans talk one more time about Mexicans flooding into the United States, we've actually had a virtual cessation of illegal immigration because there's no economic opportunity here, and most of them came here for economic opportunity. But, ladies and gentlemen, in an election campaign, don't confuse people with the facts. Yes.
I had the opportunity last week to hear Louise Richardson, who is the Chancellor of Oxford, whatever
Yes.
her title is, who is an expert in terrorism. And she seemed to downplay the risk of a huge attack in the United States, that it would be maybe smaller, more locally generated.
The question is about downplaying the potential of a major attack in this country. I've been working in the area of the Middle East now for more than 40 years. Many of you know I wrote a book with my colleague David Dallin, Icon of Evil, Hitler's Mufti and the Rise of Radical Islam. Anybody who tells you that the odds of a major terrorist attack are limited, doesn't know about Paris, doesn't understand what happened in San Bernardino, doesn't understand what terrorism does and how they work. Super Bowl, anybody take a walk down at Super Bowl City? Did you see the security in San Francisco? Did you see what they were doing to secure BART? Don't believe anybody who says to you that we are not in danger of a major terrorist attack. Maybe we'll get lucky, and it won't happen. But the odds are not in our favor. And I hope to God the next time you have me back here, that I will be proven dead wrong on that. Yes.
Henry Kissinger came up during the debate. Sanders used it to position himself from Hillary. What are your thoughts about Kissinger's role and how he's being used between...
The question is about Henry Kissinger. Ladies and gentlemen, go on a college campus and ask kids who was Henry Kissinger. They have no idea. Sanders was dating himself. But by the way, the same thing applies because the Republicans have tried to raise the Lewinsky scandal. Go on a college campus and ask anybody, who is Monica Lewinsky? They have no idea. It's ancient history. People don't get that. And one of the things that we need to understand is that there is a new generation coming up that has a whole different perspective, not because history doesn't matter, but because it's not history that is relevant to who they are and where they are. Yes?
Hillary Clinton aside, who in your mind, that 70% of foreign policy, who do you think is the strongest? I haven't personally seen a lot of strength from Republican or Democratic side outside of Hillary and her experience.
May I tell you, the question is about foreign policy experience. On the Democratic side, there is no question that Hillary Clinton towers, whether you agree or disagree with the way she formulated policy. That's the problem the Republicans have, you see. The Republicans don't have any depth. They've got two first-term senators, Cruz and Rubio. They have Donald Trump, who really has no foreign policy experience. They have Jeb Bush, who you'll note I haven't mentioned really during the course of this, who was a relatively solid governor of Florida, but really doesn't bring that expertise to the table. And I'm disturbed. I really am. Because when push comes to shove, it's foreign policy that will have a huge impact on America, including our economics. Our economics. You know, all of you remember that the Great Depression began in Europe, not in the United States, that it came across the pond. So we need to be aware of that, cognizant of it, and that is a deficiency. Look, I'm no longer a Republican. I was for many years a Republican, as many of you know. But I grieve for the death of the Republican Party, because this country functions best when it has a vital, vibrant two-party system. Whether it is in California, where we have no two-party system, or whether it is on a national level. If the Republicans suffer a crushing defeat because of Donald Trump, the only good news will be they'll have to rebuild from the ashes, as they did when Barry Goldwater was defeated in 1964, or when Alf Landon was defeated in 1936. But I want you to know, I don't care how partisan you are, you want to have a Republican Party that presents an alternative. Just like if the Republicans were in power, I'd want a Democratic Party that could as well. Last question, I believe. Yes.
Going back to the economy, have you read the book by L. Arion called something about the central bank? All the central banks have run out of games to play. And he's saying that you're going to come into a T where we had to go towards everything falling apart, or politically we come to a solution where we can actually make a difference.
Okay, look, I can't give you in the minute I have left a talk on economics. But I will give me two? Great, so I'll solve the problem. I want you to know I gave the keynote at the Delta Dental Convention. And at the end, somebody stood up, last question, John, why aren't you running for president? Would you run? I looked at them and I said, listen, I am happy to accept the nomination of Delta Dental for the presidency of the United States. And I guarantee you everybody will brush their teeth at least 3 times a day. But, look, we have a severe problem in terms of the expression. The banks are too big to fail. The last thing we want to see is what we saw in 2008, where there was a massive bailout by the federal government. And we didn't have a lot of money then. If it happens again, I'm not sure what the firewall is that protects us. All of you who are in real estate here in San Francisco, you know the bubble isn't going to last forever. But you don't want to see the bubble burst completely, or people will stop buying. And that is a serious issue, because there is a direct relationship between what people can spend and how much money they've got. If you accumulate too much debt, and there is a collapse, and all of you experienced it, you're in deep trouble. I don't mind telling you I have no debt except my house. I keep it with a mortgage because it's a tax write-off. I'm going to my high school reunion, accompanied by one of our compatriots here today. And most of the people that are my age, it's our 50th high school reunion. I know, I'm remarkably well preserved for now. Do not have the luxury. When we did the pricing about where to have the reunion, we looked at several venues here in San Francisco. We ultimately took the cheapest venue because most people can't afford a high-end venue. That's an indication of the state of the economy. Last question. One more and then that's it. I saw one other hand up. Yes, because...
Why was there no autopsy on Skater?
Why was there no autopsy? To be honest with you, I have not the foggiest notion. But I refuse to accept the idea of conspiracy theories when it comes to the death of Antonin Scalia. I think it's, if there were even...
Cheney did it.
If there... Somebody just threw down Cheney did it. No, if I listened to Michael Savage, it was Obama who did it. So, all I can tell you is, I don't believe there was any conspiracy. I think it is part of... Oh, I was coming down here and I was saying to Rich that I was sure Elvis was going to be here this morning. I mean, that's part of the lunacy. Let me just close by saying it's always a pleasure to come here, to have a chance to be with you. I know that I leave you with far more questions than answers, and I will look forward to returning in the not-too-distant future once again. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank our speaker, John. We welcome you back sooner than later, much sooner than later. And as I celebrate our 40th high school reunion this year, we are having a hearty bark. That's it.
Warren Harding is a great president.